Welcome back. So this is part 2 of what's in the box for Dominion. The first video we kind of went over the cards that they replaced, that they took out of the expansion. Of the base game. Sorry, I keep saying expansion. I usually say expansion more than base game, so it's just easier to say expansion. And then, that's what we mostly went over. And then we kind of talked about the cards that I decided to replace to make it more down-to-earth in my eyes. And most of my friends, they prefer this version than they do the original anyway. And it's definitely gotten even more players than normal. I think because I did that, there have been players who would not have played Dominion because of Curse or something like that. And so having Wasteland instead, they're like, ooh, I actually like that. That doesn't bother me at all. Yeah, sure, let's play with it. But other people, there's definitely a lot of people who it would bother their conscience, that I know for sure, that would play with Curse. And, I'm not a big fan of Witch myself. But I liked what Witch did, which gave you a minus point card. That was cool. But I didn't like the fact that it gave you a curse. So I'm like, well, let's come up with a different way. Snake Pit, a Wasteland. Thinking, who would build an estate in a wasteland? Seriously, nobody. Nobody in their right mind, because they wouldn't even be able to plant anything, because the ground would be just so, wasted. There'd be no point. So I thought, well, that works as a perfect replacement for Curse, in my eyes. All right, so let's get started. There's only 3 cards in this expansion that cost 2, and that's pretty basic. Most expansions have just 3 cards that cost 2. All right. So the first one is Moat, and you get 2 cards, and that's pretty basic. And then when another player plays an attack card, you may reveal this from your hand. If you do, you are unaffected by that attack. Now, as far as reactions go, Moat is still one of the most favorite reactions ever created. There are players who would be like, oh, we need a Moat right now. There'll be a reaction in the game, but it won't be Moat. They'll be like, oh, I wish I had Moat right now. And so, Moat is still one of the most important cards in Dominion, because it's only in the base game. And even though there are a few reactions that are similar to Moat, this one still is like the best, usually. So, or one of the best reactions ever created, for sure. And so, it would still have a place in any game, even if this was the only card you were playing with from the base game in another expansion. Most players would be like, we need the Moat. We need the Moat. Especially if there's a lot of attack cards like Militia. Alright, and then you would be protected from every attack as long as this was in your hand. So, if you're playing with 4 players, they each take a turn before you, they each play an attack card or 2, you're defended every time, because you have a Moat surrounding you, which is cool. Then we have the Cellar, and I'm not going to go over every card. I'm just going to go over the really good ones. Then we have the Chapel, and that's it for the, 2 costing cards. Now, let's go over the 3 costing cards, and we have 5 of them here. The first one is the Village. This is the basic of all villages. And the basic is you get a card and you get 2 actions. But the basic part of Village, the base principle with Village, is you get 2 actions. Almost every village in the game, in the other expansions, give you 2 actions. So 2 actions is the most, what's the word I'm thinking of? Symbolized, maybe? I'm trying to think of the word that would work as a replacement for symbolized, or the most villagey village thing about Village is the +2 actions. And then anything else is just an addition or a different variation of a village. It makes it different than the first village. And this is still one of those cards that you would be like, oh, if we don't have another village in the game, let's have this village in the game. So that's another card that you would play with in another expansion, especially if you weren't playing with a village from another expansion. Then we have the Merchant, And you get and this is one of the new cards that they replaced that they had removed from the game. So we have Merchant. You get a card, you get an action, and then the first time you play a silver this turn, this is going to produce an extra treasure basically, and that's kind of cool. But only if you're, so this is like a silver strategy basically. If there is such a thing, this is a silver strategy. And then we have the Vassal, another card that they replaced, one of the cards that they took out, or just simply put in. And it's kind of cool. You get 2 treasure, and then you discard the top card of your deck. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, if it's an action card, you may play it. So that's kind of cool. It gives you a chance possibility that if it happens to be an action card, you could play it, which is kind of cool, I think. And then you always get the 2 treasure, so even if it's not an action, it's like a gold or a silver. Oh, if it's a gold, ouch, but you still get the 2 treasure. If it's a silver, oh well, you get 2 treasure. If it's a victory card, you're like, well, that's good. That's good. That means it's not going to be in my hand in the next turn. So you're happy about that. Now, this is definitely one of my most favorite cards in the base game that they added. And overall, it's definitely one of my favorites. So you get a card, you get an action, and then you can look through your discard pile. You may put a card from it onto your deck. That is really cool. If you have a lot of Harbingers, and it seems like you always have a bunch of cards in your discard pile, this is really powerful. It's really cool. I've had a lot of fun with the Harbinger. It's definitely one of my favorite cards. And then we have the Workshop. And that's it for the 3 costing cards. Now, there's always a lot more 4 costing cards than there is 3 costing cards. And this isn't even all of them. We still have 2 more. Alright, so the first one is Smithy. And you get 3 cards when you play it. And it can be very useful, but it can also be very awful, too. So this is one of those cards you're like, okay, did I play a village before I played this? Because if you didn't play a village before you played this, then you could be hurting yourself. They end up all being action cards that you draw, and then you're like, I really wanted to play those action cards too. So if you had been patient and not played this card, and then on your next turn gotten those actions, you'd be like, oh, yes, it works out for me. So this is one of those cards where you need another card, like a village, to make it more useful to you. And then we have the Bureaucrat, and it's an attack card, and it's an okay attack card, and it's one of those, this card could work really well with the Merchant, which is why I put it on top of the Merchant. So you gain a silver card, and you get to put it onto your deck. Well, that's pretty useful, especially if you had played this first, and then had another one of these, or had a village in the game, or something like that, and you were able to play this after playing this. Could be quite useful. Nice little silver strategy. And then each other player reveals a victory card from his hand and puts it on his deck. Or reveals a hand with no victory cards. So they don't have any victory cards, they just show you your hand, which can be like, oh, I know what they have in their hand. That could be strategically useful. Or, if they have a victory card, well, they're going to put that victory card onto their deck. Which is actually kind of cool. I like that, because then it messes up their next turn. It could even mess up the turn after their next turn, even. So, that's a pretty cool attack card. Especially if they have a couple of victory cards in their hand, and you get to play a couple of these. Then we have the Poacher, and this is another one of the new cards that they added. And it's not my favorite. But you get a card, you get an action, and you get a treasure. So it's very useful in the beginning of the game. But then you discard a card per empty supply pile. So if there's 2 empty supply piles, this is not worth playing. It's one of those cards you want to trash. Because you're going to get a card, you're going to get a treasure, but you have to discard 2 cards. Is that worth it? No. Is it worth it if you only have to discard 1 card? Maybe. Depends on what card you're discarding. If it's a victory card, yeah, sure, why not? So, the Poacher can be useful, and other times it may not. Then we have the Militia. This is the most basic attack card. I'll always refer to this when I'm referring to an attack card that is very similar to this. So you get 2 treasure, and then each other player discards down to 3 cards in hand. I like that a lot. Definitely a cool attack card, and it still has a special place in my heart for games to play with Militia. Especially if I'm going to play the base game, I'm definitely going to want to play with this card. Then we have the Moneylender. And then we have the Gardens. Now, this is definitely one of my favorite cards in the expansion. I might even like it more than the Militia. But a friend of mine hates to play this card with me. And you wonder why. It's not an attack card, so why does he get so defensive about this particular card? Well, it's because it's harder for him to keep track of how many cards are in his deck, and is it even worth it? So I always get tons of victory points for this, and he doesn't really get as much, because he's usually trashing his cards anyways. So that's one of the reasons why he doesn't like this card that much, I would think. But, you know, if you're playing with Harbinger, well, you're going to be allowed to look through your discard pile while you're looking for that card. And so I always count the cards while I'm looking through the discard pile. That's how that works with Gardens. And then I know how many cards I still need if I want to get more victory points with this card. And maybe that's why he doesn't like it, because I'm, like, strategically in the lead with this card already. So that's why he would prefer to play with this one over this one any day of the week, against me anyway. And so then we have the Remodel, and then we have the Throne Room. And this is one of my friend's favorite action cards, is the Throne Room. He loves this card. It's not really my favorite. There's a card that's similar that I prefer to play than this. So that's it for this video.